In today's video, I'm continuing my mission to create the most picturesque build in Cities Skylines 2. So today we're going to be working on a small island airport for Bali Ha'i. If you see my previous videos, you'll know already we've covered some stunning tourist and industrial builds in this specific setting. Now we're focusing on and designing a realistic-ish small island airport. We'll go over the airport runway principles, discuss the pros and cons of functional versus non-functional elements, and we'll cover the decals, surfaces and assets you might want to use. Plus, we'll include a brand new asset from the Southwest US region pack. As usual, there's plenty of mods and detailing throughout, so make sure you stick around, there's a lot to cover and you won't want to miss any of it. So the major challenge in this build is really where can we fit in an airport of a reasonable scale. I landed on the very end of the island, just beside where we have our tunnel from episode 1. This tunnel, remember, it's necessary, you have to have an external road connection on these maps. Now obviously, just as I stated in episode 1, this tunnel really does look out of place on an island build like this. However, we are going to spend a wee bit of time later on and we're going to kind of disguise it into the development, and I think it came out looking really good. As you can see from the initial measurements here, this runway is going to be about 500 meters, well just a little bit more. Due to that short runway length, it's really going to dictate what type of runway we have and what type of markings that we're going to use. The type of runway that we're going to be building here is going to be a visual runway. It's appropriate for the length of the actual build itself, and I think it's appropriate for the actual island too. So the elements that are going to make up this type of runway are going to be the designation and the center line. The other elements that you might see, like the threshold, aiming point, touchdown zone or side stripes, they're only really necessary in either precision or non-precision instrument runways. There are a few exceptions. Threshold and aiming point you might expect to find only if the airport's going to be a longer one, 1200 meters, or if it's used by jet aircraft, or indeed any international transport. This little one of ours isn't going to be using any of that kind of stuff, so we're going to be keeping it nice and simple. Now you will have seen there that I just drew a road out, and I simply use that as a marker to get a nice straight line, and just drew a line of decals out here and got the texture that I wanted on the runway. It is possible to use dev mode, and you can use the networks that are included in there and actually build an airport yourself, or at least you can build the runway. I would have much preferred to do that as it looks a little bit more realistic. Obviously we've got airplanes coming in and out. However, when I did a few tests, the minimum length on the runway I think I got to work in was 800 meters. Also, the planes have some really strange behaviour. They will land, but then they kind of bug out. And if I'm being honest, I really didn't want that. It would really irritate me looking at it. I've decided to go for non-functional here on the main runway, and we'll try and add as much life to the actual airport build, and we'll get tons of functional buildings within the actual complex itself. The other reason why I didn't want to use that functionality from dev mode is that the planes are too big, quite frankly, for this development. But this airport, and indeed this runway, should be used for smaller aircraft. I think having some of the big jets that we have in the game coming in and landing, it would just look a bit odd, and it's not really going to fit in with the type of runway that we've built. That said, I still used one just for a bit of decoration at the end, but I'd have much preferred to use something smaller. Decals that I'm using here are all within Static Noises decal pack, so obviously we did the big line, which gives that really nice texture on the main part of the build, and then I've kind of bordered it off with the smaller decals. Those smaller decals have essentially got a little edge, and that little edge kind of looks like a bit of a curb, on the track. So looks pretty good. I think it's a pretty good combination. One disadvantage of using these decals is that I couldn't use net lanes over it, and I'd prefer to use net lanes to try and get some of the designation, the numbers on the runways, but it simply didn't happen. Now I could have maybe went into mod setting and changed the draw order, but I couldn't be arsed doing it. And to be honest, I don't want to mess about with it too much because it then has an effect elsewhere in the build and other builds, that I'm building it as well. So didn't want to touch that, and I just ended up using some of these decals. The numbering is definitely a bit on the small side, but I'm going to run with it. Now because I couldn't use any of the net lane lines and I couldn't use any of the surfaces to get drawn onto these decals, what I decided I was going to do was to draw out using a net lane wall, and then I was just going to sink it into the ground. It did work initially for most of them. Some of them refused to go into the ground, which was a bit irritating. A little bit later on, unfortunately, they all popped up, so I had to rip these out and come up with a different solution a wee bit later on. And that's going to be it in terms of the marking for this type of runway. So we've got our designation, which is our numbers, and then we've got the center line, which is the white lines through the middle. In case you're wondering how we choose these numbers on the runway, the numbers are basically used to identify a magnetic heading. So what point on a compass is the runway heading? So on one side on this runway, it's runway 06, that's got a heading of 60 degrees. Obviously, the runway being completely straight. On the other side of the runway, it will vary by 180 degrees, half a circle, semicircle. So 240 degrees is obviously the other side of the compass, so that's why we've got our runway 24. So we have runway 6 and runway 24. So we can have a quick scan through some of the planes that we have available in game. As you can see, some of these things are pretty massive. The smallest one we have to choose from is what looks like the Bombardier CRJ of some description. Probably fits 100 people or so on board. Again, it's still too big, for this runway. But as I said, I'm going to pop it down in the terminal building, so at least we have something aeronautical in there. In terms of any additional detailing on the actual runway itself, I'm going to use some of the tyre mark decals from Sully, and we're just going to add a wee bit of character and a bit of where you might expect the planes to actually land, and we'll leave a bit of rubber on the tarmac. With the runway now in place, it's time to get the main building blocks for the terminal and the surrounding buildings in place. The very first thing I want you to do is just put down a bit of an apron, and that will give us a starting point to build around. Now, we needed to do a little bit of terraforming. It will require an access road. It was a little bit too close to the actual runway to be on the other side. So I went and terraformed and reclaimed a bit of land and had an access road on the water side. Now, I did obviously forget to record while I put down the first few buildings, so I'll just kind of talk you through it. That main terminal building you see there with the integrated car park is actually part of the new Southwest US pack. Really good. It's just a normal commercial asset and it fits in there perfectly. I'm just going to use some of the normal, vanilla industry, and we'll get a little bit of variation here and we'll build some access roads around it. I do want to have a decent bit of parking here, and we're just going to use, again, just a normal vanilla parking assets. We'll pop them in and it works quite well. It does need to be shifted into place with Move It though. I think a nice little feature as you walk in here, or drive in here rather, will be a little retaining wall. I don't tend to use that an awful lot, but it's a nice little effect where you have it here and there and you use it sparingly. These hangers that you see, they are part of StarQ's plug hole collections, and it just means we can pop it down and we don't have any ground mesh to worry about. Q's surface mod and decal mod extensively in this build. It will do an awful lot of the heavy lifting. And the textures on these things are just so varied, and there's so many of them to choose from as well. You can combine them, push them together, overlap them, and you get some really cool effects with them. We're basically just going to create a bit of an airport apron, and we're going to kind of repeat the process in different parts of the build. Now, of course, it's not a big airport, of course, but I would like to give it a little bit of variation between the different parts, and I think it does look really, really good once we get them in. I did initially think that could maybe be a bit of a cargo depot or something like that. We've got Dom's FedEx vans there, but I'm going to replace them a wee bit later on. And again, more functional buildings here. I'm just going to slot in a couple of little commercials at the back, and I think it looks better with one, so I ended up deleting it. But I'm going to use as much functional working buildings as I can. I do want to have plenty of life down here. As you can see, the big commercial assets getting a decent bit of traffic, and that will continue as we go on with the build. So although we don't have an actual working airport, hopefully it will have a good bit of hustle and bustle, and it will at least give us the impression, looking at it from a bit of a distance, that it does. Now obviously that is the main airport buildings in place and good to go. What I also want to do is to create a little strip of industrial on the entrance road coming off the main highway. Now the plan of action at this part of the build is really just to start trying to get this tunnel blended into the development. Now we won't be able to hide it completely, of course, it's pretty large, but we're going to give it a good go. So I'm going to bring the buildings right up against the tunnel entrance or the tunnel side, and I'm just going to have little access roads on each one and just put down some of the smallest assets that we have in the game. So just plenty of 2x2 industrial assets, and a little gas station there at the end as well. Some of the oil storage assets work pretty good. That could potentially be, aircraft fuel storage, I guess, if we use our imagination. But I think it's a pretty good fit, and obviously you see a ton of that in any airport. So although it's a little bit of a squeeze, we do have a bit of detail and opportunity, and again I just want to kind of fill any gaps before we kind of crack on. I'm really just going to sort out most of the groundwork now, and I'm going to do a little bit of extra work around the airport as well and really sort out the roads. Roads always look really plasticine, don't they, and quite plain and smooth, so I definitely, in this Bali Ha'i build, I definitely want to spend a bit of time and get plenty of textures and plenty of character to the roads. I'm going to use a bit of a combination of using decals as an overlay, and I'm also going to be using some of the netlines to kind of lighten them up here and there. Where I'm not using them as an overlay, I'm going to be using them as a bit of a border around some of them. And again, the assets that we have, we can kind of get rid of some of the smooth or sharp edges, and we can essentially make our own borders, and a lot of these netlines will either go on top or below the asset themselves. Lovely little detail here with the speed bumps that we're going to have on the entrance roads to the left and the right of the main entrance. Looks cool, do like them, always look pretty good, don't they? And again, we've got a little bit more border work. This time we're going to be adding some sort of rough grass verges, to the road. And again, it's just using a little bit of variation here and there, and just trying to get things looking not so samey where we can, where it makes sense. We can use the lighter ones, we can use these kind of rougher dark ones as well. And again, just mixing and matching things. The main apron, I think, needs a little bit of dirt and a little bit of grime. That said, I think I used some of the oil here. I would be a little bit concerned if the plane is leaking oil, but we're going to have it. It is a maintenance area, so you'd expect it to be pretty dirty. And again, a lot of El Guindo stain decals there kind of make sense too. And we don't necessarily have to have them in the aircraft maintenance area. We can have them anywhere in the airport. This decal works perfectly as a rough pavement for any road. Really, really good. Really, really simple, to apply as well. And it's quite a big effect, and it looks like I guess a rough curb there as well. It's got that kind of sharper line. Looks sweet. So I'm going to get rid of all of these road markings, and I'm going to replace them with some of Sully's potholes and whatnot as well, and make this a really rough piece of road around here. And I guess you might expect this road to be a little bit rougher. It's going to be heavier traffic, of course, and then you've maybe got big trucks coming in and out of these industrial areas. So little patches and plenty of cracks, and as I said, just adding character to the area and a little bit of a worn look. I'm going to add some tyre marks here as well, nothing too major. They're quite big and it's quite a small area, and obviously some oil spillage on the petrol station makes sense as well. So I'm pretty happy with how all of the roads look. I think we've got a good bit of character on there, and it looks pretty messy, which is pretty much what I was looking for. What I'm going to do now is I'm really just going to concentrate on detailing the entrance and detailing the buildings that line up. So I'm going to use the rust decals a lot on these buildings, and very much mostly on the domed one that we have here at the entrance, and it's pretty much going to be using exactly the same decals that we did a couple of episodes ago on the forestry build. I think having them by the sea there, you would kind of expect them to maybe go a bit rusty after a while. And one nice thing about having these assets down here, and it's up against the highway with just a little alley road, is that they have to use the parking that's a little bit further away, so you get a nice bit of pedestrian access down here as well. And again, just a wee bit extra life, and we're just extending their path, so to speak. I definitely wanted to get rid of that vanilla green. I think a little blue is in order here, and we don't need to do an awful lot of recolouring work, as you'd probably expect in most industrial areas or airport areas as well. A lot of the buildings are pretty grey, white, and that's exactly the aesthetic what we're going to be going for down here. There are a couple of bits and pieces that I just wanted to break off away from that detail and effort and just get it done while it's kind of fresh in my head, and that's just to kind of add a little bit of border work around some of the airport aprons and some of the buildings as well. And we're going to be building up the layers as we go on here. This is really just the initial part of it, and I'm going to introduce some of the first of the dirt or ground decals, and it's going to be a pretty sandy sort of affair. Obviously it's right beside a beach, you'd expect plenty of blowover from the sea air and coming over into the airport itself, so I want that to reflect on the ground effects that we're going to have as well. Around the back of here, again, as I mentioned earlier on, I want to try and get that tunnel a little bit hidden. We're going to make a feature out of it in just a minute or two. Again, some more oil spillage I think makes sense, beside these big tankers, and then we'll get them all nice and dirtied up with some more dirt decals. Again, I'm going to add a bit more of the rust to the additional buildings here. I'm not going to go quite as mad as I did on the initial one, but I definitely want to try and have that sort of consistent effect, throughout the build. And I must admit, I do like that cracked decal that you see there just on the sidewalk, on the pavement there, and it's something that I kind of underutilise quite a bit. Need to get a bit more of that into the build, I think, going forward. But again, Same sort of ideas, we're going to use a bit of a mix. We're going to be use some of Sillies, some of Bromance, some of Elgendos, and we'll just use all the stuff to kind of get that stained effect and dirt effect, and it should look pretty decent. Now, a bit of oil tanker action around the back of these big storage units, and I think a little bit of colour is in order down here as well. Definitely want to get rid of any of the vanilla markings, and also I want to get rid of the names on the roads. I think I mentioned that on the last episode actually. I really need to find that mod and get that. I do dislike the names on the road, it kind of bugs me. So we can just take a wee minute and kind of see where we are. I think we've got a fair chunk of it done, of course, already, and I think at this point, as we kind of get towards the end of the build, it's really just decoration now. All the functional stuff is pretty much in place, but there's still quite a bit to do, so let's crack on. I'm going to turn my focus to the petrochemical stuff now. Again, I want a little bit of colour on those trucks first of all, and now we're going to go over to the petrol station. I'm going to be using some of StarQ's petrochemical mod, and this is the one that we used in the Formula 1 track. I'm going to use the Total Energies one. I think it makes sense. We can have some consistent branding throughout the building, which is kind of nice. So I'm happy with all the work that we've done on the entrance road into the airport itself. Now I want to turn my attention to the main buildings and what surrounds it. So there are a few opportunities here to fill a few gaps, and really just where it kind of makes sense, I want to add a little bit more in terms of the detail. Before we really dive into this chapter though, I just want to take a minute to say thanks very much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. Massive thank you to all the Patreon and YouTube members. These absolute legends are there every month helping support the channel, going above and beyond, and it really does make a difference. If you're not a member at the moment and you are interested in helping the channel out, do check out the Patreon, links on the channel description. You'll get plenty of sneak peek previews in terms of what I'm building, and you'll get a lot of game saves to check out the build yourself. Now, security is going to have to be beefed up on this airport. We can have anybody walking in off the street here, so I definitely want to sort out a perimeter fence, and I'm just going to use the net lane. Nice and simple, and we'll be using the big industrial one. It always looks good. I am going to be creating a few checkpoints, barrier checkpoints and gates and whatnot. There are a few entrances into this airport where you can just simply drive in at the moment, so that absolutely needs to be addressed. You can see those big white net lanes still on the runway. We will be sorting that out just shortly, and I have a clever idea how we can get a white centre line sorted out, given that we can't use surfaces and we can't use the net lanes on it. You'll see by the main runway that we have these lines, and I wanted to give the impression that it's kind of freshly cut grass that would need to be sort of maintained, and we're in a pretty sunny environment here on Bali Ha'i, so you would expect that to dry out pretty quickly after being cut. This additional decal I was putting on the sides, beside the kind of cut grass, caused so many problems. It ended up showing up on top of the runway, so a little bit later on I cut it out. There's no point me showing you me deleting loads of stuff and redoing it. It's kind of boring to watch, but in the end I had to get rid of them. We kind of had to rejig some of the surfaces to accommodate that. So if things look a little bit different up towards the runway and where you see the kind of taxiways, the short taxiways, then that's why. We're going to use a nice combination of these assets from Static Noise, and they all tend to work pretty well together. Same goes with Sully's sand ones that we have here as well. I'm going to use the golden ones. They are a better match to the Static Noise ones. I am going to use some of the white sand because I'm going to build another beach. Seems like I'm building a beach in every single episode just now, so obviously I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time showing you how to do that in every video, but if you're interested again how to do it, then they are available on previous videos. So here I'm just going to get the final bit of the fencing done, and then you'll see me just make these little gates, and we'll make them nice and secure as well. I think they look pretty nice, fairly straightforward, but it's a nice wee detail. I think that cliff at the edge of the runway, we will need to be addressing that shortly, so let's get that done just now. I'm just going to extend it out a little bit just so we don't have too sharp of an angle or too great of an incline rather. And again, a little bit of surface work or decal work rather on the final few buildings. Not going to go too mad, just the kind of basic stuff here on the roof and on the ground. We'll just add that little bit of grime. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I wanted to try and disguise this tunnel. It does obviously look a bit out of place, maybe a little bit less so now that we've built around it right enough in fairness. But what I'll plan to do is just use a few more pillars, we'll just spin them and we'll have them rotated at a 45-degree angle. I just want this little section looking a bit smooth, it's a little bit exposed, and I would rather have it looking flat up against the trucks, and it just looks like it's a normal wall, right, rather than obviously the pillars that they are. So I very much want it looking like a solid block, and the reason for that is that we're going to be having some really heavy equipment sitting on top of it. So let's just get that spin round and rotated and 45 degrees, and it should look the part. Yep, perfect. And then we're going to be using some of the water treatment plants here. I think it looks like an actual decent fit. You know, it looks like it's been built up and elevated there, and we'll just fence it off and make it look like it's a safe facility for people to work on. Now, I couldn't use the net lanes here, so I am just using normal props with the line tool. It kind of went in a little bit funny, I guess because there's a bit of a slope, you know, on the pillars, but easy enough. We'll just select them individually, we move it, and where we have a little bit of an overlap, again, move it, and we just shift it into place. I think that's looking pretty cool. It looks like it belongs there, doesn't it? I'm really, really happy with that one. So I am going to just place down the jet. As I said, it's too big for this airport, but it's a little bit sad having an airport and not having at least one plane, right? So what I'll do at this point is I'm just going to leave this on a little bit of time lapse. All we need to do is just some finishing touches, and then we'll do a quick review at the end. Oh, I nearly forgot the solution for the runway. I ended up using this fence prop. I spun it round 45-degree angles, so I've got the base of it sticking out, and all I did was just place it individually on the runway, and it's just going to stick out ever so slightly, and that's going to give us a white line that's actually going to work on the runway, because of course the net lanes and the surfaces weren't happening for us. Right, I'm definitely gone this time. I'll catch up with you in a minute. it's time to get a closer look at the finished product. I reckon once we've got all of those decals and once we've got a little bit of vegetation, it looks a bit more natural, right? We can take a closer look at the little bit of detailing with the gates and the fences, and I think swapping out the DHL vans for the fire trucks were the right call as well. A little strip of small industrial units, pretty nice addition. I think spending an extra bit of time on the road was worth it. The extra sort of wear and tear on there looks pretty decent, and it looks a nice contrast up against all of the rust and all the rest of it that we put on the buildings. And as I said earlier in the video, I quite enjoy the fact that people have to walk down here from the car park. We got a lovely sweeping view here looking over at our mine that we've done previously. And as we swoop over our terminal building, we can have a closer look at our tunnel that is now a water treatment plant. I think that's nestled in really nicely with the sunken trees and the sunken bushes. Pretty good fit, I reckon. So I reckon this is going to kickstart a bit of a population boom in this island. I think we've got lots of industry, we've got lots of tourism, we've got absolutely stellar transport links, and I reckon now's the time to start adding a bit more population. So we've pretty much worked our way right the way around the island, from this tip right the way around to our sugar plantation on the other side. There's quite a decent bit of development area there, and there's some nice flat land to build on as well. And not to mention we've got the main town of New Suva, which has still got quite a bit of expansion space still to be used up as well. So I reckon we still get plenty of episodes even though space is tight, and I'm really looking forward to getting cracking into it. Don't forget, if you fancy supporting the channel and supporting my work, then do check out the link on the description. Patreon memberships of course are open. I'm going to leave you with the last couple of shots here. Hope you enjoyed it guys. Take care of yourselves. See you in the next one.